All right, listeners, I think you know that we are part of the Radiotopia network, which is basically a network built on the idea that you should support the most creative, independent audio makers around. No one, and I mean no one, embodies the Radiotopia ethos more than Benjamin Walker and his show Theory of Everything. Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, has been making beautiful, personal, sprawling audio documentaries for decades that help us understand the very strange world we live in. And now he has a new series called Not All Propaganda is Art. The new series goes back to the 1950s, when Western security agencies like the CIA paid artists, writers, and intellectuals to fight the cultural Cold War.
The CIA funds were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Gloria Steinem, activist who sees the CIA as a sort of enlightened pal or rich uncle, there is another viewpoint.
Look, if you're listening to this show, I know you like secret histories. I know you like a mix of culture and politics and shadowy figures. So what are you waiting for? Not All Propaganda is Art from Benjamin Walker. You can find it now wherever you listen or at theoryofeverythingpodcast.com. This day is brought to you by Progressive. Are you driving your car or doing laundry right now? Podcasts go best when they're bundled with another activity. Kind of like Progressive home and auto policies. They're best when bundled too. Having those two policies together makes insurance easier and could help you save. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. Quote a home and car bundle today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, March 3rd, 1933, Frances Perkins becomes the U.S. Secretary of Labor, a position she would hold for 12 years. One of only two cabinet members, actually, who would serve under FDR for his entire presidency. This was the start of a remarkable career, or a sort of pinnacle of a remarkable career, and of course, a first. Perkins was the first woman appointed to the U.S. cabinet. And as we'll get into it, she navigated her firstness in really fascinating ways, playing both the political and the social gender dynamics game throughout her career. One tidbit, early in her professional life, Perkins had begun taking notes on male colleagues, and she filed them in a large red envelope labeled, this was the name of the envelope, Notes on the Male Mind, which is just amazing. So here to talk about Frances Perkins are, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
And our special guest, Jenny Kaplan, co-founder and CEO of Wonder Media Network and host of the excellent Womanica podcast. Jenny, thank you for doing this. We've been wanting to have you on the show for a while.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. What a lady to talk about.
I know. So do any of you have a red envelope labeled Notes on the Male Mind?
I mean, I'm starting one right now.
I know, right?
Not yet.
You're going to be the first subject, Jody. So.
Yep, here we go.
Sounds like a plan.
The 2020s version of that has a whole section on podcasters. I mean,
that's right.
Dude, podcasters can
binders,
fill many
full.
envelopes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's digital, it's shared. We can all just have one.
That's right.
Yeah. We'll get into kind of like, as I hinted at, these two spheres, right? Let's call it like the office politics side and then the politics side, because obviously when you're Secretary of Labor, there's all sort of interesting policy and so forth. But well, I guess first off, Jenny, have you covered Frances Perkins on Womanica, or have you sort of encountered her as you've talked about other interesting women in history?
We have not yet covered her. She is definitely someone who's been top of mind for many months in the past as we've been sort of sorting out which women we want to include in which themes. Every month has a different theme on Womanica, but we are definitely going to be including her moving forward. So I'm excited to chat about her now, and we're going to feature her in upcoming months. So
this counts as research.
Yeah, exactly. So you're doing my work for me. Thank you so much.
So let's go to that world of office politics. I mean, any thoughts beyond her Notes on the Male Mind envelope about what how she managed to work her way through very male spaces?
Well, one way that she did it was just by being tremendously good at her job. She was someone who rose up through the ranks of Hull House and these other communities that serve the poor in Chicago. She had been involved in the labor movement and labor activism in the 1890s and the 1900s, and she's very quickly tapped by the leadership of New York State to get involved in industrial negotiations. And she just goes in to these extremely male spaces, and she doesn't make much of a fuss. She just has everyone sit down and start talking and gets right down to work. And I think that sort of no-nonsenseness about her really helped her rise the ranks.
She also sort of knew when to speak and knew when to sort of sit back and take notes. And I think oftentimes that was her strategy of just sitting in the back of the room, taking it all in. And then when she did speak, people listened. And I think, you know, what's interesting about Frances Perkins is that she is in so many pivotal places after witnessing the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. And I can't imagine witnessing something like that. But that really fuels all of the activism and energy that she puts into FDR's New Deal and all of the policy that comes after this. So she really gets to like shape a lot of transformative policy in American history that I don't think a lot of Americans are aware of.
I also think it's interesting that I also host a podcast of ours called Women Belong in the House with a capital H. And one of the things that I learned on that show is that women more often run for office and get into politics to solve a particular issue that's facing them or their community or family or whatever. And Frances was so clear throughout her career, it seems, on exactly what she was fighting for and what she sort of demanded. Even when she was part of FDR's cabinet, like she was so clear on what her priorities were and what she needed to get done. And that clarity, I think, really helped her be really, really effective.
Because it meant that she had an agenda when she had an opportunity. And the New Deal was a huge opportunity because it was largely just this campaign slogan that FDR had used in 1932 to win the presidency, but it didn't necessarily have a coherent set of policies behind it. And when he turns it over to Frances Perkins and says, "Give me the New Deal," she populates it with all of these programs that she had been thinking about for decades at that point. So she was able to build all of that infrastructure the moment she had the opportunity.
Can I just say that I feel bad that I did not know more about her, that I did not know that she's like central to the creation of Social Security, like the WPA, you know, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, the Federal Works Agency, that alphabet soup of the New Deal is all her, like, or in big parts her. And, you know, she just, it's just unfortunate because Roosevelt gets all the credit for that. And, you know, there's a woman behind the scenes that's doing that work, and that's Frances Perkins.
And that relationship between the two of them is really interesting. We should get into that. You know, I do want to highlight this thing that we've been talking about of sort of having this deep conviction over the course of decades before she then reaches this point of power. I mean, she talks about, you know, feel this deep feeling she has from her early days in Chicago and then in New York of wanting to do something about, as she said, quote, the unnecessary hazards to life, unnecessary poverty. And this was an era when, you know, I mean, we have Jacob Riis writing How the Other Half Lives and people being really awakened to this. And Kellie, you mentioned the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. She actually said that was in 1911. She doesn't. The New Deal obviously isn't until the late 30s and 40s, but she has said that the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire was the day that the New Deal was born, and maybe that was for her particularly, but also, you know, we did an episode with Eric Loomis, that labor historian, and he sort of offhandedly pointed out that fire was so impactful because it took place in Lower Manhattan, where you have people walking around who are one day going to be secretaries of labor. You know, like these things aren't happening in a coal mine in West Virginia or somewhere where people see it. It happens in the middle of Manhattan. Powerful people see it, and it really impacts them. And I just was struck by her that's exactly what happened here. A really powerful, rising, soon to be extremely powerful person witnessed the fire firsthand, and it just gave her this deep conviction.
Well, and when we say she witnessed the fire firsthand, she had been drinking tea nearby, and they heard that there was a fire and rushed out to see it. And for those who don't know a lot about the factory fire, women were jumping from the 7th, 8th, ninth floor of this building and, of course, dying on impact, dozens of women. And Perkins was there watching it happen. And she was shouting up to them, "Don't jump, help is coming." And help wasn't coming. And I think that sense of helplessness and tragedy is part of what continues to fuel her in the decades that follow.
Yeah. She helps Al Smith become governor in 1918. She does a lot of work gathering the women's vote. And then when Roosevelt is elected governor of New York, he brings her into the fold and offers her the job of industrial commissioner. And then, of course, when he becomes president, he appoints her. That's what we're talking about today. You know, Jenny, do you have thoughts on kind of Roosevelt's role here? I mean, I don't know what the right word is. Champion, backer. What's the dynamic as you can see it?
You know, I think that he should definitely get credit. I mean, it is that he nominates her and she becomes a first, which is amazing. And he clearly allowed for her to grow into that role and have real influence, especially as we were talking about, especially with the sort of promise of the New Deal without a lot of the details figured out. She was able to really come in and do what she wanted to do, and he respected that. So I do think that it shows that they really had a significant and productive working partnership, which is amazing at the time. And I think it's really interesting to me, especially when thinking about that fire and the impact it had, that labor was something where Frances came in really with clear thoughts in mind of how she wanted to protect people who were being impacted by rules that weren't looking out for them. And it took things like that spectacle where it was really, really obvious to her and also to people like FDR and everyone else who was watching that something needed to be done. And she filled this void where there seemed to be leadership missing. So I definitely think he deserves credit. And also, I think it must have required a lot of political know-how, and just in terms of how Frances acted to be able to get all those things done in rooms where she was likely the only woman, or definitely the only woman at the table.
I think this also shows like how important it is to have women in the room, because they consider things that men aren't considering, like child labor laws. You know, I mean, this is so important in a time where you have children that were working alongside adults, incredibly long hours and incredibly dangerous facilities, and, you know, putting regulation around that, even looking out for women in terms of their own employment. So World War II is a perfect example of this. When men are going off to war, you would think that Frances Perkins might be like, yeah, let's draft women too. And she's like, actually, they can take the jobs of the men who are gone. Like, you know, like, let's find a way to spread this labor around and include women in places where we traditionally would not see them.
She has a list of demands when she gets the appointment, which is kind of amazing. I mean, she knows exactly what she wants, you know, from the beginning, but it's a lot of these priorities that you pointed out, Kellie. And Roosevelt's response to this list of demands, I think, says a lot, but he says, quote, "I suppose you're going to nag me about this forever." And so there is that, you know, political power, and then this woman as nag trope as well, working its way in right there. I suppose it's no surprise there was also pushback to her nomination.
Absolutely. I mean, she herself had resisted the role at first because she thought that maybe labor unions would respond better if there were a male worker in that position, and they felt like they had a direct pipeline. And labor leaders, though, they do oppose her nomination, but they do it in very explicitly gendered terms. The leader of the Seamen's Union has said in response to it, he says, "I guess us sailors, as well as bricklayers and miners, better get a powder puff and lipstick to march in the inaugural parade." So this fear of the feminization of the Labor Department was very much at the front of laborers' minds.
Men are the worst.
Put it in the file, Kellie.
Put it in the file.
Yeah,
I can't help it. Just like really, but you know, this is something that's so consistent throughout the historical moments we've covered. But yeah, it's just crazy.
I think it's also really interesting that she got this pushback that's so gendered and so, I mean, just the words are like cringy to listen to. And in some ways, labor had this masculine, you know, it's the labor unions feel very stereotypically masculine. And yet her power was in that she was considering child welfare and like labor laws that would ultimately be something that would really help no matter what your gender was if you were in the workforce. So it's like they were doubting her, and yet it was the things that made her different that really allowed her to be so effective. Yeah,
and I mean, it gets at this larger thing of like progressive politics has often had a real misogyny problem. I mean, all politics has had a real misogyny, but, it's something that I don't think is really, you see that here. And there was a bit of a controversy over the fact that she went by her maiden name, which we haven't even talked about kind of as a choice. But, the Oakland Tribune wrote that she really is Mrs. Paul Wilson. Anything we know about her marriage or her personal life and whether it sort of affected her professional life in any way?
So she was married to Paul Wilson, though by the time she is in this position, her husband had been institutionalized, so they weren't living together. And ultimately, she would end up living with in a series of long-term relationships with other women. Of course, there's very little space for kind of public acknowledgement of that at the time. But she had a longtime partner while she was Secretary of Labor, and then after that partner dies, she would actually live with a woman representative in Congress for the rest of her life.
I think that at that time, not only does it seem unusual or surprising to me that she went by her maiden name, although that's very common now, but also I think it's shocking that that was actually something that married female federal employees had to use their husbands' names on their paychecks. So it wasn't even just like a social choice. This was something that was forced on her at work to actually get the money that she was owed for what she was doing.
Wow. So she is, as we've said, 12 years as labor secretary. We've talked about some of her accomplishments, but, it goes the entirety of the New Deal, obviously into World War II. What is your sense as we wrap up about in her time, and then we'll talk about the legacy, but in her time, do you feel like she gets, there's an understanding of how critical her role is in all of this?
It's hard to say that she received as much credit as she deserved because she was an architect of the New Deal, and I don't think that was widely recognized, though I do think that she was understood as a pretty important partner of FDR's, but also I think seen as, she's just a very unusual woman, and so, okay, we'll let this singular woman be part of FDR's cabinet. She would go on after leaving the White House and after FDR's death to write a best-selling book about FDR and his administration. So she was a very public figure in a couple of different ways throughout the 1940s.
But I do think that in public memory, it's more important to see her as an architect rather than as a foot soldier. She's not just someone who's taking orders. She's very much constructing the legislation that we benefit from to this day. So, I don't know. I kind of wish that she was more widely known. There's a federal building that has her name on it. I'm sure that there are, other accolades that have her name attached to it. But she still, in my mind, hasn't become like the household name or even has the same prominence as someone like Eleanor Roosevelt, Yeah.
She is in office until 1945. Apparently on her last day, a full orchestra is playing at her goodbye ceremony. And she stood there and shook hands with all 1,800 of the Labor Department's employees on her final day, which is a kind of amazing tidbit. And shout out, I don't know if the orchestra played throughout that entire thing, but shout out to the second chair violin who has to just keep going while she shakes 1,800 hands. But yes, nevertheless.
I just hope she had some hand sanitizer.
Right? My pandemic self is like, no, don't do it, Frances.
Wash your hands.
She died in 1965 at the age of 85. As we wrap up, do any of you know, she was appointed in 1933. Do any of you know when the next woman appointed to the cabinet was?
Oh. I have
no idea.
Question.
It's got to be.
Okay, wait. Give us a hint.
It's probably much longer after than you would expect or want.
Don't say the 90s. That would be bad.
No, not that.
I'll settle for the 70s. Jimmy Carter.
1975, Gerald Ford. Carla Anderson Hills is the Secretary of HUD. And then under Carter, there are 4 women in the cabinet. And then, from there on, But yes, between 1933 and 1975, no women.
Wow.
She was the first, and then a 40-year gap. So yes. All right. Well, let's leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
And Jenny Kaplan, co-founder and CEO of Wonder Media Network, host of the Womanica podcast. And what else you got going on? Plug. You can plug.
We've got lots going on. You can check us out at Wonder Media Network. Follow us, Womanica Podcast, on all the socials or at wmn.media.
Perfect.
Check us out. We're doing lots of fun stuff. And thank you so much for having me.
Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. What is Odoo? Well, Odoo is an all-in-one management software with apps for every business need. Odoo has apps for CRM, accounting, sales, HR, inventory, manufacturing, and everything in between. And they're all in one easy-to-use software. And the best part about Odoo? All Odoo apps are integrated, helping you get things done faster and more efficiently. So, when you think about business, think Odoo. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday.
Radiotopia.